All right, welcome back to Kingdom Come Deliverance 2. And while I'd love to just glaze it like a donut all the way through, I just can't. Fact of the matter is the story. It's not bad, but while being crystal clear, it's noticeably weaker. Not so much so, but to the effect that, like I said, it's noticeable. And it sucks because the foundation was right there. I mean, there wasn't any major crack or issue noticeably. It was more so just a matter of maybe little plot holes or character dislikes that didn't really translate well into the game just simply kind of fell to the side and never really got acknowledged. And it kind of lends itself to a little bit of a mismatch between gameplay and the narrative as a whole. But we'll get into that, especially with the characters. And to start with something a bit more overarching for the characters, I'll say that the character development in KCD 2 is stunning. I mean, Henry, who was once a blacksmith's son, now turned into a noble knight, has just become more compelling just within the world. Now that he's clued in, there's a maturity that was once lacking, a depth that is now present. He's sharper, more emotionally aware, and just generally more confident within Bohemia, especially with the shifting political tides. And you can feel this growth, not just through the dialogue, but through your actions, choices, and even with the way he interacts with the people around him. And I mean, this is really seen, especially with other characters that work alongside him and throughout the game. I think Hans really grew in this game. And while maybe some liked him in the first, I really didn't. And while initially he came off as a bumbling noble son or just some guy who was comic relief, now really feels like a noble that is coming to see the purpose and role and responsibility of his job. He's now an individual. He's layered, unpredictable, develops fears, strengths, weaknesses, and really add nuance to him. I'd even say the same about characters that are on the front cover, like Jan Žižka and Catherine. I mean, they're rebels, and there's a weight behind them, especially once you initially meet them, and this weird subtlety, this weird mystery behind them to start before you get to know them more. But that's where also I'd say the game starts to wobble. Their development isn't bad by any means. I still think it's really, really good and just shows them growing as people. But I don't think it's to the same level as I just mentioned with Henry and Hans. I think that they have, little flashes of brilliance, but what I feel like could have been much stronger, powerful arcs kind of really happen around Henry. He just kind of does little things to fulfill requirements for them rather than Henry having an innate, deep, heavy effect on the actual game itself and their storylines with these characters. And while this disconnect isn't inherently immersion breaking, I do think it erodes some of the narrative cohesion. I mean, especially when this game expects us, at least I'd hope to, that it has us care about these characters in a much deeper, true way, kind of limits us because all we ever get is fragments and almost, context based moments that don't really show a person, especially in their true colors for the time, I assume. All right, all right. You knew I was going there. Godwin. And here's the thing with Godwin is that when you first control him, it's actually a bold but refreshing move, you know? You get teleported, you sit up and you're like, "Oh, okay, we're doing this now." And it's a new perspective. It's a fresh lens, and it gives the context to the conflict for Bohemia a way bigger breadth. But that's the thing. The novelty has now worn off. It's a fundamental problem. I didn't sign up to play Godwin. I'm here for Henry. In the first game, we've been through everything with him and chose for him in some cases. And to just get moved over to some random, unpious alcoholic, I just don't see the point in that. And I get it. It's about offering more context, painting a bigger picture, and giving, the player access to areas that Henry maybe normally couldn't have or shouldn't have. But at what cost? This game, at the heart of it all, especially the first one, based itself on immersion, realism, grounded storytelling, and gameplay. But when you suddenly just yank your eyes out of someone else and put them into, like I said, an unpious alcoholic priest out of nowhere, you're literally breaking that immersion. They're not the same person even a little bit. And it's like watching a play that you were acting in and now needing to cry for your role. It doesn't make any sense. That just can't happen. All right, and this is exactly what I'm talking about when it comes to this issue, the Sukdal Castle. Now, let me just go ahead and get into that sequence. You start off as Godwin, working your way around, talking to the nobles, and it's a council, right, of anti-Sigismund nobles, and it's all in secret, hoping to form a united front. But then guess what? Out of nowhere, von Bergov's forces are now at the castle and essentially just lay waste to everyone, capturing and killing whoever they can. And on paper, that sounds crazy. I mean, right? It's a high stakes political intrigue meeting behind the back of like the most noble king, most important king in the region, and people pass away. There's a fallout to it. But here's the thing though, and I mentioned it in passing, but all you're doing is playing the sequence as Godwin. And all of a sudden, towards the latter end of the sequence, when things are finally starting to get intense, guess what? Poof. Now you're back as Henry, and now you're here to just like save the day. You got all the context too, so you're not even really disconnected from the fact that there was a whole attack just suddenly. It's a dissonance. It's a strong one and it's frustrating. Like it sounds fine when maybe talking about a meeting. Okay, like first we'll get into the chaos of Godwin's POV, then switch it to Henry and they'll get the full picture. But it completely kills the flow. If you were feeling bad for Godwin, don't be. You're the savior. Now, if you felt bad for Henry for not being there, don't be. You were Godwin. You were there. Like, what? That doesn't make any sense. There's no feelings attached to it anymore. The player now becomes omniscient, which is completely disregarding the whole idea of being immersive and realistic, and it undercuts the game completely, like alongside itself. It pulls its own rug because now we're just observing what's happening. And sure, we get to kill a couple of guards or a couple of knights, but like for what? I mean, it doesn't necessarily add to the story. We all know that from how free to, like, how open world games work. It doesn't matter what you do at every point. But for a game that prides itself on being emotionally connected to you, it's tricky when you just get teleported around. And this investment, I just feel like it wanes a little bit. And this kind of ties the two ideas together that I've just been recently talking about into kind of a tension that's been playing its role throughout most of the game. And that's this issue of the game being open world and free, but also being partially linear when you're playing the story. And look, with any open world, players will explore, and you'll stumble across plenty of locations before the story even gets around to them. For example, Sigismund's camp, the Jewish quarter in Gutenberg, and even Sukdal Castle itself. But here's the thing though, is you've already seen all this before. By the time you get to the story's gripping points where these areas are introduced and you get to see these climactic areas and cinematic set pieces, it's gone. It's already done. You've seen most of it already. I do think some of the set pieces still retain their value, but it's limited, it's lesser. And this is especially the case, though, I'd say, with the Godwin missions. They're basically scripted at that point, though, and that's where it's an issue. It's pretty much an on rails linear experience. You don't get to free roam as Godwin and go on like a crazy escapade. You still have a mission by mission thing to perform while playing the game. And like I said, while in the first moment it's good and in small doses, it probably works and kind of helps to give you that context. These perspective shifts within an immersive game just completely kill your vibe. It is essentially just a forced cutscene that you have to play through. And now, when you get back into your open world, it's as if as you just stopped playing, turned off your computer, turned it back on, reloaded the game, and now you can keep playing. It's a complete disconnect, and you don't feel like you've been able to have a smooth experience yet. And I just feel like this is what makes it more noticeable and even bleeds into the Henry portions of the game, especially later on. And I feel like this is where it all starts to show. On one hand, I think KCD 2 is this immersive, expansive, historically grounded sandbox. But on the other hand, there's this focused, linear cinematic story with choreography and emotional climaxes that is pretty meticulously planned out. At least that's the way it seems. And I think that's an issue is that these two goals, while both absolutely amazing to see from a studio that really does care and show love for its game and its players, I think are at odds and don't really play nice together. By the time you're reaching the late game, it's really where the cracks start to show, and that's the sad part about it. The stakes are so much higher and the lore is so thick that now you're still going to get yanked out of Henry's experience because you still have to see what Godwin is seeing and what else is happening across the world. And by this point now, it's disorienting. It's already happened a couple times, but now things are really moving and you can't really afford to have that disconnect occur. And that's the thing is once that happens, guess what? You realize I'm not playing as Henry, I'm playing Kingdom Come Deliverance 2, the game, as Henry. And then that's the shame because while you still technically are Henry, and while the game is still amazing and really still tries to set the world for you as Henry, it's the moments where you feel like you're Henry that have the most weight. Not the moments where you feel like you're in Bohemia, but the moments where you're dealing with the consequences, the weights, and the real toll that Henry would go through, not some omniscient god in the world of Henry. And while I'll kind of just talk about these meta topics, I'm going to talk about the next thing. And while this one might be a little bit controversial, I'm going to say it. I think KCD2 has way too big of a cast. I loved KCD1. The core cast was tight. Maybe about 8 or so ish major characters. Everyone was distinct. They had their arc if they needed one, and they all at least had their own character and impact. In the sequence, I'm liking it still, but counting, we're pushing at least around upwards of 14 or more. And that's the thing, you can't handle all of them with the same level of care. Some new faces I love as additions. Others, they're more like chess pieces, just being moved around to kind of push the plot forward, but they're not really living the world nor playing a role in it. And because, like I said, these narrative jumps occur semi a little too frequently, I don't think everyone also gets the time they deserve around Henry. You don't connect with the characters around Henry, you connect with the characters that are important to the story. And while those aren't always different, they're most certainly not always the same. And that's the issue that I feel like we're running into. And it can kind of feel the cast leaving a little bit of a bloated taste in our mouths, I say. Unless you're keeping track of the names, faces, and also rereading all the codex entries to really learn about these guys, I think it's tricky to lose track of certain characters as well as see the importance of certain ones. At least that's my personal idea. And look, I'm gonna just finalize all this by saying this though. I still love KCD2. It hasn't changed one bit. It's not a complete tear down saying how trash this game is, but it's more of a critique. Look, I'm not saying I can make this all positive, I just don't think I could. But I love this game so much that I want it to do it good and keep doing things good. And I think that this game is something that's worth admiring. It's so well made and so beautiful in everything it has done and has achieved that I still hope for what it can do and for what the next games the studio can produce can do. World building, absolutely phenomenal. The historical setting, unlike anything else otherwise. The attention to detail is amazing and something that, if maybe not completely realistic, it feels so much like you're in 15th century Bohemia that it deserves so much credit for that. And then that's the thing, is just story wise, I think it needed a little bit more tightening, some more focus, more planning, less moving around and overall omniscience, and just more immersion. I don't care if I didn't know what happened and everyone is dead. I'm Henry and I don't get to know that. Now I have to figure out what happened and make it work with what I have. That's part of life. That's part of realism. And beyond all that, though, I must say that what made the first game so special wasn't even just the realism or the swordplay or the grit, but it was Henry, even if he was maybe a little annoying. But it was his journey, his pain, his growth, our growth, with him as the character and us leading the charge. And when you start taking that away, even in small doses, you're risking losing the very soul of what makes this game shine. And I don't think it's too far gone by any means, but I just think it should be known so that we don't make more mistakes.